Everyone. This is Dr. Syed Haider and Michelle Harvey. I'm kind of like jumping into her, live stream, and so we didn't really like plan who was gonna like present or introduce or whatever. So I guess I'm just gonna do it. But yeah, this is your show, Michelle. So you take
Great.
over.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so this week we're going to speak about nervous system dysregulation in the context of long COVID. And yeah, actually, this was going to be a two-part series. So this is just about the identifiable symptoms and the mechanisms. And then next week I was going to more do treatments for nervous system regulation, although I'm sure we can intersect that somehow. So this is how long COVID impacts different organs. And as I'm sure everyone knows, um, there are many different symptoms and their pathology that's synchronized with that, although there's a lot of intersecting ones. And one of those is dysautonomia, or otherwise known as nervous system dysregulation, and that's a neurological symptom that you can see in the top part there. So that's kind of how it fits into this overall picture of long COVID. Um, and here is a graph showing how at risk having dysautonomia is when you have long COVID. So long COVID basically leaves you predisposed to having certain conditions. And you can see with the dysautonomia, I think it's more than 80% hazard rate. So it seems to be something that's really common and a lot of people experience when they're having long COVID. Um, so here is some information about basically the different hypothesized mechanisms of long COVID. So immune dysregulation and viral persistence is one of them. Dysbiosis that also is related to viral persistence, and disrupting the microbiome is one. Autoimmunity is one. Microclotting is one. And then the last one that we're going to focus on today is the dysfunctional neurological signaling. So this relates to nervous system dysfunction. And all of these are kind of the core mechanisms, I would say, of long COVID. So to focus on the nervous system, so there are two branches of the nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And parasympathetic is the rest and digest, and sympathetic is fight and flight. And much of the nervous system processes they just happen automatically. We don't control digestion or heart rate, or many of these, almost all of these processes. The only process that we control that serves as a bridge between different nervous system states is breath work. So we can decide, we cannot think about breathing, but we can also control it, and then that changes our nervous system state. And that's one reason why breath work is really useful when it comes to recovering. I mean, helping your nervous system. So to speak a bit about the mechanisms of specifically nervous system dysregulation. So the immune system and the autonomic nervous system work together. So any change in one can kind of trigger changes in the other. And one, I think the incel DX test is probably the test that reflects this kind of continued cytokine reaction that the immune system has in the case of long COVID and other chronic conditions. So, that kind of test can determine whether you're having this continued immune response and inflammation that can also affect the nervous system. So the second mechanism is damage to endothelium. And this basically happens. So this is to do with the communication between the autonomic nervous system and the vascular system. So I think that this also relates to why people often experience things like issues with cholesterol, and other kinds of, you know, things like damage to the endothelium that causes high cholesterol, and these other symptoms that also people experience in long COVID. But this section specifically talks about how it relates to the nerves. Um, yeah, and it's to do with the yeah. So here it says the oxygenation of the blood to different brain cells, and basically the microvasculature in the brain doesn't work as well and is not communicating properly. So this is interesting. Neurovascular coupling. So as clusters of nerve cells activate to perform a task, they summon just the right of blood at the right time. So damage to the endothelial cells, as we spoke about in the last slide, also disrupts the communication basically between neurons. And then this leads to the common symptoms that people talk about, such as memory issues, vision problems, sleep problems, anxiety, and these kind of common symptoms. Breathing dysfunction. So yeah, apparently, this is actually something I learned quite recently. It takes 100,000 repetitions of breath to create a new breathing pattern. So that's just 4 days of altered breathing that can then lead to kind of lingering breathing issues. So say you have COVID and you can't breathe very well, you breathe shallowly or in a labored type of way for just that. I mean, 4 days is not even very long at all. I mean, people often have COVID for a week or 2 weeks or longer. Then your body kind of forgets how to breathe properly, and there's stale air left in the lungs. It's difficult to get the right amount of oxygen in your blood if you're breathing in a really shallow way. Things like hyperventilation, irregular breathing patterns. So all of these things relate to are also linked to the nervous system and can cause different nervous system related issues, because basically the parasympathetic nervous system is activated when we're not breathing well. Um, and then the last one is just lifestyle changes. So I'm sure a lot of people know that just psychological stress can cause nervous system dysregulation. Um, so, it can cause inflammation, depression, and a lot of these similar symptoms that we speak about in long COVID. And then, of course, there's the thing of just the general pandemic being quite stressful on people, and the fact that people would get into bad habits, like more sedentary habits, maybe eating food that's unhealthy, junk food, snacking too much, and of course, inflammatory food just feeds into this inflammation that we're talking about, this general inflammatory condition. So that's really the last mechanism. Yeah, I found this quite interesting company that basically does different types of neurological tests. And these are categorized into different things. So visual feature dissection, nonverbal working memory, logical reasoning, decision making. So they do a test and they score you on these different things. And then basically whatever you score the worst on, that's a good place to start in terms of treating your neurological or nervous system driven related conditions, because the types of treatments and the types of things that you can do to address those different categories are actually quite different, because they correlate to different regions of the brain. So that's something quite interesting, and this is obviously very nuanced. So here's just a general list of symptoms.
So, which company does that? The scoring and
It's called Cognitive FX.
cool.
Yeah,
And then they have like some sort of online treatment program based on this, or
I think
how's it?
it's in person actually. Yeah, and they it involves different types of, like, they have for example, I saw one one video, one thing that it was like a sort of cage that was set up with different levels and different things poking out, and you have to like touch different points of the cage. So you're using balance, you're using coordination, you're using, your eyes are determining distance and all these different things. So, or standing on one foot on one of those balls that you kind of balance and wobble on. Um, and there are all different tasks that can really target the region of the brain that they think has been compromised by long COVID, according to how you respond to this kind of test that they do. So that's quite interesting.
Is that cognitivefxusa.com?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so these are symptoms, yeah, that relate to neurological issues. Yeah, so this last slide, I just wanted to speak about, this idea of how this idea of nervous system dysregulation is not actually specific to long COVID. And here's an example of how this issue of nervous system dysregulation can happen in other instances. So in this example, childhood trauma leads people into a state of chronic neuroendocrine vulnerability. So let's say chronic high cortisol. When you're really, really stressed, then you get stuck in this fight and flight state instead of the rest and digest state. So that means you can't digest your food well. So when you're eating in a high cortisol state and you're really, really stressed, then that means that the correct digestive enzymes are not being produced. Your food is not being, maldigested food is making its way down through your intestines. It means you're not absorbing the nutrients that you need. It can trigger leaky gut, which can then trigger inflammation. And then once you have this leaky gut and inflammatory kind of thing, then that leaves you much more susceptible to things like mold, infections, Lyme, autoimmune conditions kind of further down the line. So, this kind of nervous system dysregulation can really be traced back even to some kind of event of childhood that was stressful. And I think we spoke about this a really long time, but I was talking about this study that I read about like how specific intolerances to food can come about. And there was one example where like a child gets home from school and their parents are always arguing and they always have this snack of milk and cookies, let's say. And then that association of negativity and stress and cortisol can become the starting point of some kind of intolerance to that food because they're always eating that food in that specific state. So the nervous system is really, I mean, of course, it's like a whole body system. And it's hard to really separate, it has such a systemic and multifaceted effect on the body. And in terms of treatment, so here are kind of main categories of treatment. The mind-body therapies are more things like the Qigong, somatic experiencing, which is another mind-body practice, massage and body work, thoughts and feelings, psychological therapy. So that's just normal talk therapy, managing thoughts and feelings. That's more things like mindfulness and meditation, rebalancing your biochemistry. So as we spoke about, nervous system dysregulation can lead to things like high cortisol, hormone imbalance, things like gut dysbiosis, gut health issues, leaky gut. So all of these kind of downstream issues have to be balanced and addressed if you're going to actually heal the nervous system. And then lastly, the lifestyle. So of course, sleep, movement, although, in the case of movement, it's a difficult one because we need to kind of make sure that we don't trigger any post-exertional malaise and stay in this zone 2 activity. Things like breath work, because that's a bridge between the sympathetic and parasympathetic, light exposure, and then a lot of things that we speak about in the group coaching program, such as grounding, being in nature, community, detoxing addictive behaviors, and any kind of addiction to I don't know, Netflix or any kind of addictive behavior, just focusing on filtering that out. So those are kind of the main things to address, and I was going to speak about those in the next one. This is just really this focus on mechanisms and on identifying the different symptoms.
Cool. Yeah, this is fascinating. I mean, I had long COVID, as you know, and in my experience, it seemed like this was really the main thing that was wrong with me was autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and it manifests in different ways in different people. But I think some people will have severe fatigue and anxiety and insomnia. I mean, what I had was just very bad insomnia and really bad anxiety. Um, Thankfully, I didn't have severe fatigue, but yeah, I've spoken with Doctor I forget his name, but the one who does the injections in the neck,
Oh yeah, Dr. Groisman.
Gorsman, yeah, and he says that almost everyone that he sees that comes into the clinic with long COVID or vaccine injury, they have swelling and inflammation of the vagus nerve, and so that's a pretty clear indication that the vagus nerve is not working very well, and that's the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. Um, One of the interesting things I came across when I was preparing for the FLCCC conference presentation that I did was a study on chronic fatigue syndrome patients, and it said that most of them, if not all of them, have low baseline catecholamine levels. So the catecholamines are things like epinephrine or adrenaline,
Mm-hmm.
and dopamine also is a catecholamine, and so that kind of makes sense, but it's not quite what I was, I guess, expecting, because those catecholamines are more linked to the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system, so the fight or flight kind of side. But it does make sense in that, like, people oftentimes feel a little depressed and they don't have motivation to do things, and they have fatigue, right? So that kind of makes sense with low dopamine, and so baseline. So like the amount that should just be kind of like floating around in your bloodstream, not enough to make you like hyper alert or anything like that, but just to kind of like get you up and going in the morning, is too low in them. And so that can be corrected apparently by cold exposure. And so there aren't great studies on cold exposure, but one of them, they were in cool water. It was 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so not freezing cold, like a normal, probably cold pool. And they stayed in it for an hour, which is a pretty long time to sit in 60-degree water. But the interesting thing was that the catecholamine levels shot up like 4 or 5 times, and they stayed up. So they followed those levels for an hour after they left the pool, and they stayed significantly elevated. I mean, they barely dropped for the next hour. So it's possible that cold exposure corrects that. And chronic fatigue syndrome is very similar to long COVID in the
Mm-hmm.
pathophysiology and the symptomatology. So it's highly suggestive that it would also be beneficial for long haulers. And anecdotally, it is. I mean, it was beneficial for me, amazingly beneficial, and it's beneficial for a lot of other people as well. And the other thing that I thought of while you were speaking is that it's really helpful for getting rid of addictive behaviors. So whether that's related to food or people, or activities like watching Netflix too much,
Mm-hmm.
or anything, pornography, whatever. And so I think that a lot of people in the modern world have an issue with some sort of addictive behavior, whether it's related to food or something else, entertainment. And this helps. I think one of the ways it helps is by raising those baseline dopamine levels. Like, I think that if you can get through like 1 or 2 minutes in freezing cold water every day, you can basically do anything. I mean, it's like you leave that experience and you're like, nothing else seems hard the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it raises your dopamine levels, which are linked to motivation, energy, mood. So it gives you're in a better mood, and you just find it like you don't feel like I've had some addictive behaviors throughout my life, around food and stuff, and also entertainment. I mean, I used to just like sit around watching movies all day long. I mean, it was like insane. I would just like go from movie to movie, and and that like you don't even feel like the desire, right?
Mm,
After doing the cold plunge, it's like it just doesn't occur to you. It's like you just don't feel like doing stuff that otherwise you might feel like doing. And there's a lot of things that help you do that, right? Exercise is another one, but it's not really available for most long haulers. So if you can
mm,
exercise, then that's certainly like a fantastic way to break addictions, because it also raises dopamine levels. Really, I mean, one of the
mm.
things I discovered was really like any lifestyle change you make essentially will improve your baseline dopamine levels and help you break out of this kind of vicious cycle of constantly chasing the dopamine rush, right, which lowers your baseline dopamine levels. um,
Yeah, one thing that I found out fairly recently. I was listening to the Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast, and he was talking about this idea of how the podcast was specifically about how to be more motivated, to get things done. And he was talking about the dopamine circuitry and basically saying that, you know, a lot of things deplete our dopamine, and we kind of normalize them. So even listening to music,
mm,
like anything that is really joyful and you feel excited about, like, or being in love or any of these things, or watching Netflix even, and basically you can just max out your circuitry, and then you lose motivation for other things, because if you think about how humans evolved, like, we didn't evolve for this hyper stimulation of constantly listening to music, constantly listening to podcasts, constantly seeing so many people and like being so stimulated. And then you've basically just you've overused the circuitry. And then when it comes to being productive on a task, you're just not engaged and you're not, driven to do that. And I think that this is quite interesting, to think of, because when you're doing work of some kind, whether it's your own work or your job, there's a level of engagement and in excitement. Of course, it's not excitement in the same way as, oh, I'm going on a holiday, or maybe for some people it is, but you're kind of driven because you're engaged in a certain way. And that is a very specific type of energy. And if you imagine kind of, well, how I imagine it is that I'm going to use all of that energy on things like, I don't know, listening to music or watching Netflix or whatever. And then after that's all used, you can't really cultivate that for another type of task. So I just think that being aware of depleting that is something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I remember one
Yeah.
time when I was in med school, I got sucked into The Sims. Okay, so I don't know if you ever played that game, but it's
Yeah.
like life on steroids. Okay, because you can do everything really quickly. So you like tell your character to like study and learn how to become a neurosurgeon or something, and it takes like a few minutes, right? It's just like
Mm-hmm.
you speed it up. They're studying. They're like flipping through the book. It's so silly. And then you advance in your career. Something that would in the real world take decades takes like hours, right? And so like, you feel like constantly stimulated and excited, like, okay, now I'm buying like a bigger house, and now I'm buying like nice furniture, and now I'm
Mm-hmm.
buying a nice car, and now I'm like, etc. And this whole process of like your entire life can be lived out in like a couple of days instead of like, like 90 years.
Yeah.
And it feels kind of like you're achieving something, right? Even though you're not really achieving anything. Um, and
Mm.
so I was just like so sucked into it. I mean, you can't imagine. I'm like one of these people that just like goes crazy. Like one of these people you read about in like China, right? Where they're like not eating or not sleeping and they're just like playing the video game all day long. I basically did nothing but like eat while I was playing the video game and like collapse into bed like, at like 2 a.m. and maybe sleep for like 4 hours and then wake up and play the video game again. And I didn't go to school. I was in med school. I didn't go to class for like 3 days. Okay. And and that's all I did. I went to the bathroom, thank God, and ate and slept and played this video game for it was literally like 2.5 days. And then finally my computer crashes, okay? And it wiped out everything. I hadn't saved it, right? So like the whole thing was wiped out, and I was like, and then I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm just gonna stop.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like so my point here is that like a lot of things are like that, right? Like naturally, like we've evolved to like enjoy company of other people, right? And in a certain quantity, right? And so like normally, you joke around with your friends and you laugh, right? And you know, but then like if you go to like a comedy club or something and you're just like laughing nonstop for an hour, and I know there's like laughing therapies and stuff, and maybe some people really need that, but it's just like a lot of concentration of like, and a lot of stimulation, right, in a
Mm,
short period of time, which is a bit unnatural. I mean, maybe it's not unnatural if you do it once in a while, but you can, sometimes people will like get hooked on it, right? Where it's like, oh, it made me feel better, and then you just keep going back to it. And I think that's the issue with entertainment, that it's enjoyable, but it's like compressing like a lot of, it's like sugar kind of, right? Like
mm,
it's a refined like life experience. You're like refining it in such a way that's like extremely unnatural, that just wouldn't have happened ever before, right? In most of our
mhm.
evolutionary history, you would be sitting around a campfire and somebody would be like telling stories or something, right? And it's just not like a shot to the vein of like cocaine, right? Like
Yeah,
it's more of a whole food, versus these, what you see on a television screen, that with all this like rising, like you watch like when they're creating movies, right? And like you see it without the music and it's like so boring, but then they add
yeah.
in the music and they add in all this stuff and all this post production and everything, and then it just like it really sucks you in, and it like
Mm.
plays on your emotions, right, like a harpstring. And so
Yeah, and I think it takes up too much space. Like I think I'm similar to you in that I have this capacity to be hyper focused and addicted to things. And I in January I was sick for a few days, and I basically I because I don't watch Netflix, I don't have a subscription or anything, but I borrowed my roommates and I started watching Outlander, which is this kind of
right.
period drama of Scottish period drama, and I got addicted to it. I had to finish the whole season in 2 weeks. And then I started to dream about Outlander. I would think about like what it would be like to live in the 18th century. I was like, oh, what about Scottish castles? And I was like, this is literally taking up half my brain, this stupid TV show.
Right.
Like this is horrible. And then I'm just wondering, how do people do this every day, like as an integrated part of your day? For me, it's not possible. Like I'm super sensitive and I get hijacked very easily by something so stimulating. And as you're saying, the music and the storyline and the characters, like it really brings you in, and then that becomes you find yourself thinking of it in the day, you dream about it. It's too much, it's just taking up too much space. And I just think, like, what else would I be dreaming of? Like maybe I would have some really interesting, like analysis to do according to like Freud's dream analysis book, if I wasn't just dominated by Outlander and period dramas during my sleep. Like it's just, I'm missing the opportunity for this kind of insight. If you're interested in dream interpretation and all of this, if it's just completely hijacked by something else, and this is how it feels, like a hijacking, what would be in that, taking up that space, if your that space wasn't hijacked by something else? And this feels like a waste and a shame to me, really.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think there's other problems too, right? Like, I mean, like most people watch these things at night, and like it's stealing from your sleep. I've been thinking about this a lot. Like,
yeah.
Elon Musk just tweeted out this like this funny like cartoon. And he's like, I wonder why we can't sleep, and it shows like this cartoon person like staring at their computer, and their like eyes are turning red, and then finally
Yeah.
they they're like this, and then they go to bed, and they're like they're like awake, and they can't fall asleep, and then they reach for their phone, and
Yeah.
and so yeah, so like the problem is that first of all, you're stimulated, right? But then like as bad, you're just like staring into an LED, right? That's like shining light
Mm,
into your eyes, and your eyes are not meant to take in that blue light at night, and especially of such an intensity. And so it keeps you up like far longer than you would be able to stay awake if you were sitting
mm,
around a campfire and just listening to stories and like enjoying yourself with other people. You would get tired within like an hour or max 2 hours of the sun going down, right? Like maybe 2 hours of the sun going down,
mm,
but like within an hour of, so this, when the sun goes down, it still stays pretty bright for like an hour. So what I mean is like once like it's actually night, right? Like once it's actually
Mm.
dark out and it's done, like the light is completely gone. After that, like if you don't expose yourself to unnatural lighting, you will fall asleep
Mm.
in an hour. Okay. It's,
Yeah, yeah.
you can't stay awake. You will be so tired.
Mhm.
Okay. And this is
Yeah.
something that has been shown. I mean, even people with severe insomnia, you take them camping without artificial lighting, and no one has insomnia anymore, right? It's just
Mm.
impossible to stay an insomniac when you're in natural lighting conditions. And so, yeah, you'll just turn off like a light. But if you're like doing something like staring at a screen or watching something like that, you won't even feel tired for like 5 or 6 hours while you're doing that. Like you could stay up until like, probably 5 or 6 hours after you would have fallen asleep normally, right? And then finally you'll be feeling really, really tired, and you might fall asleep at like a few hours before sunrise. But
Yeah.
even if you just do it for like an hour or two, even people like, I know there are people who are not like me who can like do it in moderation and like, watch an hour a night or something, right? Even
Mm.
they are stealing somewhat from their sleep, right? Like they would have gone to sleep earlier, and maybe it's just an hour, but like an hour a day less sleep over like years or even months is like a huge sleep debt, and it's like a huge drag on
Mhm.
you, and it's like a lot. But worse than that, I think, is just the depth of their sleep is not as deep as it would have been if they hadn't been staring at bright lights, because your
Mm.
melatonin just doesn't, it shuts off completely when you're staring at an LED screen after dark.
Mhm.
You just don't have any melatonin production in your brain. And so I think those are really important things. And for me, I think it really made a big difference, in especially in losing weight, when I just decided, what, I'm just gonna be really strict about my sleep and, just shut off things and go to sleep. Right. And,
Yeah.
you know, and there's like different levels of strictness, like you can, a lot of people think they're doing pretty well, but they like, if they became really strict, they would probably add an hour or 2 or 3 hours to their sleep every night,
Mhm.
or go to sleep much earlier. And the sleep before midnight is far more refreshing and rejuvenating than the sleep after midnight. And especially, the least rejuvenating sleep is the sleep after sunrise. I mean, it's like it's not really adding a lot, especially compared to what you would have gotten before midnight. And so if you can sleep more before midnight, you may find that you wake up really easily, fully refreshed, really early in the morning, right? Like around sunrise, perhaps. And then if you can do that, like you'll find that like your productivity, if you like work in the very beginning of the day, or even if you have a job that starts at 9 a.m., you can get a lot done if you wake up at sunrise, like exercise, meditation, whatever, right? Walking, you can do a lot in that time, or reading, or just stuff, before everyone else is awake and before the day gets started. Especially people who have kids, the kids don't wake up that early usually. But yeah, you can get up before like, all the activity of the day starts, and really the productivity that you get after sunrise is incredible. I mean, there's nothing else like it. You can't get that later on in the day. It's just not available. There's something special about that time, just psychologically,
Mhm.
neurologically. um,
Yes. Should we answer questions?
oh yeah, okay.
I was going to say something else, but then I was like, no, because then we'll continue on the subject.
Well, say
I
it
think.
briefly and then we can answer.
Well, no, I was just thinking that I think that aside from all of those mechanistic points, I think that um, we shouldn't be exposed necessarily to such intense stories and dramas and narratives in the kind of way that we are when we watch these things. And I think that that can make you desensitized to the normal experience of life.
Yeah,
And then basically your whole experience is diminished because it doesn't compare to this hyper stimulating thing. Um,
yeah,
I think this happens to different degrees with different people. Maybe some people are more um, you know, um, uh, but then again, I also think that if you do it every day, you become desensitized basically to not only your life, but also the material of the Netflix, whatever it is. Like you aren't as affected by that. But I know for me, because I watch a TV show once every like 3 years, it's literally like I can't sleep. I'm like having crazy dreams. Like it's just affecting me so much. And then I wonder, it's probably the same thing as a food intolerance. It's sort of like if you don't eat gluten for 3 months and then you eat suddenly a whole bowl, you notice something really intense. Whereas if you eat it every single day, a small amount, you're just suffering from the micro consequences on a daily basis. And I feel like watching TV shows is probably like that in some ways.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that people don't know what they're missing in the real world when they're doing stuff like this. That's a little bit unnatural from an evolutionary perspective, and the depth of their relationships might change if they change what they're doing. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that. There's a lot of satisfaction in the real world, and there's this it's like really deep satisfaction, right, when you do things the way they're meant to be done versus in this kind of artificial way or way that's not deeply satisfying. And so um, yeah, I mean, it's just like a real relationship versus a kind of like a cardboard cutout of a relationship, right? And people have these kind of very superficial relationships nowadays, right, where they just take care of maybe their physical needs or what they feel are their emotional needs, but in a very superficial kind of transactional way sometimes, versus a real deep, long lasting relationship that you have to invest in over time. And I don't know. It's like I guess the proof is in the pudding. You have to like taste the real food before, it's hard. You just have to like take someone's word for it or something, or just decide that, hey, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Um, maybe this isn't all there is in reality. Like, especially if you're somebody who feels like unfulfilled or like there's no meaning to life.
Mm.
Like, why am I here and all this stuff? Like, you go to like the middle of the Amazon rainforest and like live with a tribe, like no one has those concerns, right? Like they just don't exist. And it's not that they're like on the edge of starvation and they're about to die. I mean, it's just in a natural setting, like these things don't come up, right? Like these like questions, they don't apply to people who are in their natural state, right? It's like the world is very meaningful and it is very rewarding. Um, and so if you feel like it's not, then there's something wrong with your environment, I think. It's not, there's
Mm.
nothing really wrong with you, right? Like if you put yourself in the right environment, you will um, feel the right
Yeah.
way, right? Like you'll feel.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, just I spent the last, as I was telling you, the last 5 days at this community in the countryside, and I was super tired as soon as it was dark. And then yesterday I came back to the city and I couldn't fall asleep before midnight. And it's literally just a switch. It's really insane when you're not surrounded by a Wi-Fi. It was really dark. We were doing a lot of like planting vegetables and in the land and walking barefoot. And there's a kind of sauna that they made. Like we cook all the meals together because it's a community. So there's just all of the things that we talk about, in the group coaching that you're supposed to do. So just 5 days of that. And then I come back to the city for one day and it's like a light switch that just goes back again. So, and I think it's easy for, people to be really critical and say of themselves and say like, oh, it's just me, I'm terrible, I have horrible willpower. But changing your environment can just help so much. And even just as an experiment, as you said, go camping for a few days and just notice how the experience is different. So
Yeah, I mean, one of my messages at the FLCCC conference was that like you can hack your way to feeling better, and you can hack your life, and but if we really want it to be sustainable for like billions of people, you have to like hack your environment, you have to like change your environment, you have to change everyone's environment,
mm,
right? We have to build really healthy like cities and communities, and just like you have to design not just your lifestyle,
mm,
but you have to design your environment, right? And
yeah,
so I mean, if humanity, if we want to be optimally healthy and optimally satisfied, we have to think about like, should we really be doing this? Should we really be building this? Should we really be, investing in this stuff? Just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? And I remember, one of my so Shabazz is He's this healer in Jordan that I've spoken about before, and he told me once that, like, I think, like, some past societies, they were incredibly advanced, and they may have seen, like like somebody may have seen that, like, hey, we could go down this avenue of, like, developing, industrialization, or electricity or whatever, right? Like, maybe these, like, popped up in the past, and people were like, you know what, that's probably not good for us. Maybe we shouldn't develop this kind of technology, right? Like, an unnatural technology. Maybe it's not helpful. Maybe it's harmful. And I think we, as just human beings, should be thinking about this and considering it, and not like Luddites exactly, but there are a lot of technologies that seem to be quite harmful for us, right? Especially the
Mm.
electromagnetic technologies. And they could probably be made safe, right? Perhaps.
Mhm.
But, when it's just like there's all this censorship around the dangers of them, even though there's, like, thousands of studies on the dangers of electromagnetic fields, and, all the chemicals that we produce. But, industry has, covered up all those things, and, everyone has just been brainwashed into thinking they're all safe, and that this toxic soup that we live in is okay. So anyway, I don't know where I'm
Mm.
going with this. Let's get to the
But
questions.
that okay. Wait, can I
You-
say one more thing?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah, I was going to say on this thing of being a Luddite, this community that I was just in for the last week or so, they're doing a really interesting concept that leverages technology. So basically, they're doing a decentralized ownership concept through
Mm,
tokenization, and you can either buy tokens to live there, or you can do proof of presence, or like proof of community, or proof of regeneration, and different types of proof to basically have an ownership stake in this decentralized community. And the ethos and values are already laid out in the blockchain, because it's one of the first, like, land ownership DAO concept. And yeah, it's a really interesting model for basically this idea of owning something. A lot of people these days struggle, to buy a house, or even you're just in this hamster wheel of the system that we think is just normal and kind of set, and you just need to work to force yourself into the system. But there are actually a lot of people doing really interesting alternative communities where you can be a part of that, through these different types of decentralized models of ownership. And I think, but then of course, when you're there, it's based on regenerative agriculture and community, and people cook together, and there's just this very openness to suggesting a project that everyone votes on, whether we want to go ahead with this project or not. And you're living outside, and there are specific rules, about using the Wi-Fi, or when is time to kind of do mindfulness practices and yoga together. And so it's this nice combination of not, I mean, I guess my point is that, when we talk about all of these things, the idea is not just to kind of replicate 18th century life. Like, there's a way to actually leverage technology, especially decentralized technologies, to kind of cultivate this life that we talk about, that is really connected and really, yeah, just connecting back to these ancestral wisdom practices. Actually, the place is called Traditional Dream Factory. So it's kind of merging these, the traditions with something new and tech, orientated. So yeah.
Well, because while we were talking, I was looking up, like, the pricing of Cognitive FX USA, and, like, 1 week of their therapy is $13,000. 2 weeks of the therapy is
Wow.
$25,000. So
Wow.
before anyone rushes to spend $13,000 on Cognitive FX Epic, 1 week therapy,
You could go
go
camping.
something for something, for like $0, and see if
Yeah.
that fixes your problem, or join one of these communities for like a week.
Yeah.
Because seriously, I mean, like, these, you can spend so much money, and at the end of the day, if you just, like helicopter dropped yourself into the middle of the Amazon, and, like, one of these traditional cultures, you would be feeling fantastic, literally, probably within weeks, right, if not sooner.
Mm.
And I've seen that happen when people like really decide, I'm just going to like get rid of all the bad stuff and start doing all the good stuff. It's like days to weeks for them to feel better. Okay. It's like
Mhm.
super, super fast. I mean, that is, I think, what I want to like convince more and more people of, that, that's like the thing that you want to sell people on, that like, if you just commit fully to like living like in an environment and in a way that's like really deeply nourishing for your body, it's like what your body expects, your body will give you what you've been, trying to get,
Mhm. Yeah, it's
and
not
what,
about willpower and forcing. It's about setting up the container for that experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Okay,
that's a
it's
good, I
questions.
guess. Yeah.
Um, so someone says, "What's your take on nervous system dysregulation and POTS, and is there a way to reverse or heal?" Um,
So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go and then you can chime in.
yeah.
So yeah, POTS is definitely nervous system dysregulation. I mean, it's postural
Hmm.
orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So you stand up and your heart rate just like goes wild and it's racing, far quicker than it should be, as though you're like running, 100-yard dash when you're just standing up. So yeah, it's definitely a problem with the nervous system. It's pretty common in people with long COVID and vaccine injuries. And my basic belief is that you can heal from anything, and that doesn't mean that I can heal anyone from anything, and it doesn't mean that everyone will heal from anything. It means that you can, right? It is possible to heal, but healing, there's a lot of different things that might be involved with healing in a specific person, and I can't tell you what it is until I meet you. And then I might be able to tell you, right? Like I might have an intuition of what it might be, that like the button that we might need to press in order for you to heal, or the thing that you might need to do differently in order for you to heal. And sometimes I don't have that intuition. Sometimes you just have to try different things. But oftentimes you can reach that intuition yourself if you work at it enough, so like it's I think, Michelle, you can talk about this too, that like some people, just based on your whole life experience, you just kind of have like a feeling or like a inclination towards something. And that's what you've seen, right? In the group coaching program, that people
Mhm.
just, oh, what, I think this is something that makes sense to me, and that it, I like the idea of it. And whatever that's triggering, like it could be triggering a placebo effect, or it could be like actual like intuition of like something that's like deeply true for your body or whatever. But it's not surprising, like you are the one who knows the most about yourself, right? Because you are yourself and you've been living with yourself, and so your subconscious and your conscious, like they know more than anyone else would know about you. And the answers are often there if you just ask yourself and just wait, and maybe like just give yourself like this empty space for the answer to come, right? Like instead of like constantly filling your mind with information and like constantly reading and constantly looking at your phone, just like take a break for a day or two and just like stop thinking, right? And stop looking and stop searching for the answer, and just ask yourself, what should I do? And if you just quiet your mind, silence yourself for a while, your talking mind, oftentimes the answers will just come to you, that like, this is probably what I should do next. I mean, most people know what they're doing wrong and what they need to do to get better.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Yeah, and I think this last slide on the presentation, like these are all the summary of everything to regulate and heal the nervous system. So when you look at these kind of things, of course there are all the subcategories, but what's missing? Like ask yourself what's missing. Do I need psychological therapy? Do I have mind body connection that's good? Do I have a mind body practice, a mindfulness practice? Do I have the biochemistry one? Do I have leaky gut, hormone imbalance, all of these other things? Is my diet and lifestyle good? And just with a framework of all the things that affect nervous system, um, then you kind of know what I think people know what's missing for them from this list.
Yeah, and so it kind of depends on the person. Some people will just kind of like learn themselves and start trying different things, right? And other people want to be given like a program to follow, right? So there are programs like retrainingthebrain.com and the Gupta method, and then there's facilitated methods, like something I came across recently called the lightning method, which I think is also similar. It takes things from NLP or neuro linguistic programming and other traditions like qigong and tapping traditions and other. And it's like I think all of these programs, they kind of are just taking from like this ancient knowledge, especially from the East, usually around meditation and meditative movements and breath work, and they just like kind of like come up with something that worked for the founder, and then they present it to you as like, okay, do all of this and do it in this way. And they're far cheaper than this other one that I was just talking about, that the cognitive FX. They're probably in the $200 or $300 for like a you follow the course and then you learn the program and then you start doing it. But it's like they're basically just repurposing things that people have been doing for thousands of years, but they're like giving you like a structure and saying like, do all of this, right? Do this,
Mm-hmm.
and people get better. We hear from a lot of people. I've heard from a lot of people on Twitter and other places who followed these programs and they got better. I mean, people like had really severe long COVID and vaccine injuries, and it wasn't just all in their head, right? Like it's like, and this is I guess where some people find it to be a stumbling block. It's like, well, if you're telling me to like retrain my brain and everything, you're telling me that it's all in my head, right? Like it's all I'm making it up, or it's like subjective, there's nothing objective, and that's not true. So it there is objective things wrong with you, right? Like your heart rate is reacting a certain way, you have markers of inflammation, like there are physical things and signs and tests that I can run that will show all these problems, right? They'll show cytokine, markers elevated,
Mm-hmm.
and you can find the spike protein, and you can find the microclots, and you can find all this stuff, right? That will prove to whoever wants to be, who wants proof that you have a real problem. But I think the key thing here is that your mind can overcome all of that, right? Like your mind can like control everything in your body essentially, right? And we, yogis who train themselves and other practitioners of these ancient arts can learn to actually like control these subconscious processes, or maybe even unconscious processes, where they can learn to control their heart rate and other things that we don't usually have access to. But everyone's mind has that ability, right? Like you can control the inflammation in your body, right? Your mind, your subconscious can turn it on and off, right? It can trigger healing. It can stop healing. It can unleash viruses from inside your genome that have been suppressed. And it can unleash them just in certain places and not in other places. And there's a lot of evidence around this, that the mind is just extremely powerful, and it can either prevent healing or it can lead to healing, right? It can help you get rid of the spike protein, or it can prevent you from getting rid of it. It can help you, get rid of microclots, or it can prevent you from getting rid of microclots. And so this is just like the elephant in the room for most people that they're not addressing, right? Yes, you can fix all of those problems with like targeted supplements and medications and stuff. But I think that that's like a far less effective and far more crude method of trying to fix these things, even though we think that it's advanced and very sophisticated. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it really isn't. It's and really like the way it seems to me is that, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I think that the actual like reality is even more ridiculous than it sounds. So physicians are like these monkeys that are fiddling around in a nuclear submarine, and they think they understand what's going on. I would say that the monkey probably understands more about the physics of a nuclear submarine, than we do about the body. Okay, the physics and the biochemistry and everything about how the body works and all the intricacies of what's going on in bodies, we understand less than that monkey. So the monkey sees like some steam like spewing out of a pipe somewhere, and it's like, oh, we got to stop that steam. Steam is bad. Steam is hot. We need to stop it. And okay, so maybe you stop it. Maybe you like tape it over with some duct tape or something, and then like the pressure increases somewhere else, and stuff starts breaking, and you don't even know it. It's so far away you can't even see it. And eventually your submarine is like headed for the bottom of the ocean. So the body is just incredibly complex, right? Like we've understood a lot of the complexity, but there's even more complexity beyond that we don't understand. And it's similar to the way, like, physicists will like break apart atoms, and like these little molecules will come flying out, and then you break apart the molecules and like 100 other molecules come flying out of that, and like it's like it just never ends. It's like you can keep digging deeper and find more and more complexity, right? And so the body's like that. Every level of reality is like that, right? You can zoom out and like look at the entire universe, and it seems incredibly complex. And you can zoom in as much as you want on any little piece of it, and there's just like exploding complexity every time you zoom in. I mean, it's just like, and you can zoom, like you can, telescopes, right? Like we keep looking further and further, and you keep seeing more and more, right? There's
Mm,
just more and more out there to see. Whether you look out or you look in, there's always more, right? Which is just, it's really incredible. It's mind blowing. Um, and there is no way to keep track of it all. Like, how does ivermectin affect all of that complexity? So there's our own genome, and then there's our own biochemistry of our own cells, and then our mitochondria have their separate genome, separate from our nuclear genome, so separate DNA and their own little biochemistry going on. We haven't really fully understood even our own biochemistry and that of our own mitochondria yet. Okay, we don't understand all the little pathways, right? We don't even know all of them. We don't know how everything's working. And then they interact, right? And then you have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of different species that are also interacting with you and your mitochondria, and they all have their own DNA and they all have their own biochemistries, and we don't understand them either at all, really. And we don't understand how they all interact with each other, right? Like the interactions is where the real complexity develops,
mm,
right? Like how things, like when you press a button here, or like you pull on something here, and then like it's like the butterfly effect, right? It's happening in our bodies all the time.
mm,
It happens at every level again, right? It happens at the universal level, it happens at the level of the world, it happens inside your bodies. Everything is interconnected. And you push a little button that seems like, okay, it makes sense. Blood pressures went up, blood pressure going up bad, kind of like the steam escaping from the pipe, and you force it to go back down. You're like, oh, I have we found this receptor that like modulates blood pressure, and we found this other one that does it too. And okay, let's push that button and make the blood pressure go down. That must be good, right? And yet the body's like, all these messages I'm getting from the environment and from inside me and from my brain and from my thoughts and my emotions, everything, all these messages are telling me I need my blood pressure to be at a certain place. I need it to be up, right? For whatever reason, right? Your body has this wisdom and intelligence, right? That it is beyond what we understand, unfortunately. And so we think it doesn't make sense. We think, okay, we need to lower the blood pressure. But you lower it, and the body's like, I don't like that. I'm going to downregulate the receptors. The medicine is going to become less effective. Blood pressure is going back up. Sorry. And we keep fighting it, right? And it's a losing battle. Eventually, the blood pressure just stays up, and you can't get it down anymore. All right. And this is, I think, like the basic thing we're doing with everything that we're treating in Western medicine, right? Every single symptom, everything that we're doing is working on this basis of fighting against nature to try to quote unquote fix something, and not understanding how that affects everything else, right? And so even if, like, say you have like cancer or tumor or something, and you're just like cutting it out and throwing it away and like nuking it with like chemotherapy and radiation therapy and stuff, like the cancer is not the real problem. Okay, like that's I think my basic message here is that what you think is the problem is not, it may not even be a problem, first of all, and second of all, if it is a problem, it's not the real problem. Like it itself is a representation of the problem. It's like a message to you. It's like somebody deep inside you is sending you like a flare. It's like, help me, right? And it's just like stubbing your toe. It's like, you know, pain receptors, right? Okay, we don't like pain, but the point of pain receptors is that you can like survive the world, right? So that you don't kill yourself in your first year, right? If you were like completely numb, you would be dead in short order, right? Maybe not in your first year, but once you start walking around, right, you would be knocking into things and breaking things, and you would be touching fire and burning, and you'd be dead pretty quickly. And so pain illness, all this stuff, right? These are like your pain receptors of your body. And if you numb them by just like covering them up or forcing them to like shut up or cutting them out or whatever, you're not actually fixing the problem. You're actually destroying yourself, right? So anyway, I could go on forever with this. So just jump in and be like, shut up. The next
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I think the point, the thing of getting to the point where you can really embody this is what you're saying is really the struggle, because the knowing is one thing, and then the really
Yeah, I
embodying
mean,
is
I'll tell you, I maybe, like I said, I can keep going forever. So I think that this is important. So like I
yeah.
had
Mm.
severe migraines my whole life, all right? And I didn't get them like every day. I wasn't like one of these people who has like a migraine every 3 days, but it would be like every couple weeks, sometimes even every week, right? So it was pretty often, depending on what was going on in my life. You know, and I'd always just like, since I was a child, I had like started taking medication for them. And like as I got older, like they were just sometimes so severe that like I would be like, okay, at the first sign of migraine, I'm just gonna like try to destroy it with like 800 milligrams of ibuprofen, just like hit it hard and fast, try and get rid of it, right? And if you wait too long, it's just gonna like take over, and you're just gonna be like knocked out, and you're just gonna be like suffering and everything, right? So I would have this approach to it, like, and it's like looking at it as like a war, right? Like it's an enemy that you have to destroy, right? And this is the way that you feel about a lot of illnesses, I think, in the modern world. And one day, like I started like, I started discussing this kind of stuff with Shabazz and like started treating people with like natural approaches. And eventually one day I was like, you know what? I, I really believe this stuff that I'm talking about, right? Like, let's apply it to the migraine. Let's stop, using the medication on the migraine. So I was just like, one day I was just like, you know what? I'm never going to take another painkiller for a migraine. And I just made this decision. And within like a month or two, the migraines were like 80 to 90% less severe, and they lasted like much less, far less, far, far less time, right? Like they didn't last as long. And and that wasn't like the end of it. So I started to like experiment with all these things to try to like help solve the migraine when it came. And so like I sometimes deep breathing would work, and I was like, oh my god, like I got rid of a migraine just by like doing deep breathing. Like what? But it didn't work every time, and sometimes I would do like acupressure and they would go away, and sometimes I would like massage my scalp or something, and like after a while I came up with like 5 or 6 different things that I could do, and if I cycled through them I could usually get rid of the migraine one way or the other. But that's like not the end of the story either. So eventually I became more sensitive to like where was this coming from, right? And it didn't happen so like the migraines got much less severe within a couple of months, but like this part of it took probably more than a year, maybe even 2 years, where I started to be like, you know what, like there's triggers for this thing. It's like when I am like usually, like, actually, probably like every time I have a migraine, I'm constipated, right? That's one thing, right? There's some link to like, my gut. And if I fix the constipation, the migraine can go away. And then the other thing, like I just realized this really like recently, like probably actually years after I stopped, treating my migraines, at least 2 years after, maybe even 3 at this point. I was just like, I was like, I started waking up with headaches. And I was like, that is so weird. Like, I have never woken up with headaches in my whole life, right? Like, sleeping is what would get rid of the headache, right? Like, how can I be waking
Mhm.
up with a headache? And this happened like a few times over the course of a few months. And then like one day, like suddenly I realized like it's when the room is way too cold at night, I'll wake up with a headache. All
Yeah.
right. And I was like, oh my God, that's what it is. And I think the way I realized that was that I suddenly discovered that like taking a hot bath got rid of a migraine. And this was like counterintuitive to me because like when I was younger, it was like I felt like I had to like put an ice pack or something on it, right? Or I had to like, you know, put something cold on it or like get cold to get better. And so I was doing cold plunges. I was doing like, and I started alternating them with like hot baths, like hot bath to cold plunge, right? Like going back and forth between them. And one day I had a headache and I got into the bath and I felt a lot better. And then I went to the cold plunge like right away and I felt worse again. The headache came back. And then I was like, oh, it's the heat. And so I started thinking like, again, from like an ancestral perspective that like, at least on one side, in the side that I look more like my dad than my mom. So my mom is like Swedish English, and my father is Indian, essentially subcontinent. And but I look more like him. So maybe my inclination and my body is more like that side of the family. And it's really hot over there, right? And people, hundreds of years ago would not have ACs, and they would just like
Mhm.
be in the heat all the time. So maybe my body is just like it needs more heat, right? Maybe it's just not
Right.
hot enough. Maybe I'm not getting
And
hot enough.
and
And
heat's a
and this,
vasodilator, right?
yeah, absolutely. And
So
so
it opens the migraine.
yeah. But like,
Mhm.
I think my deeper point here is like, instead of trying to figure out like, okay, what's going on at like a microscopic level to figure out what to do next, like try to like step back and be like, well, what does my body expect from my environment, right? And so I probably could have figured that out if I had done that before, but like I kind of like put it together in reverse. But I think like the point here is that if you look at kind of your ancestors, or just like humans ancestors in general, right? Like, what did the natural environment look like? And we can piece it together pretty well for most people around the world, but some people may benefit more from sauna than from cold, right? And maybe we need both. I mean, a lot of our ancestors were exposed to both. Um, and so some people, they may not benefit as much from the cold plunge. I've benefited from both, honestly. So there are certain, maybe some of my ancestors were in very cold places in the winter and very hot in the summer, right? Like, it was both that a lot of our ancestors were exposed to. But some people, their ancestors come from just like tropical regions where it like never gets cold. So it's possible that those people may not need any cold plunging, right? Like, it may not be actually beneficial for them, So the same applies to like a lot of things, like diet also, right? So some people may, like, carnivore may be the thing for them, right? Like, and for other people, it may be the worst thing in the world. It may not work at all. So anyway, let's move on. I got it off my chest.
So
Do you have a cutoff time? Do you have to go?
um, no, it's fine.
Okay. How long have we been going? It's been okay. We're over an hour, but like, we should
Yeah.
take a few more questions, right?
Yeah, let's do more questions. I'm trying to think which one. So so someone asked about histamine. I still feel like I have histamine issues, Marcel. Um, I can't take quercetin. Anything else natural I can take for histamine and MCAS.
Okay, so they've been taking Zyrtec and low histamine diet. They still feel like they have mast cell histamine issues and can't take quercetin. Anything else natural I can take for histamines, MCAS? I want to wean off Zyrtec. Yeah, there's a lot of natural supplements that have antihistamine effects. One good one, is black seed. So Nigella
Mhm.
sativa. That's a really great one. A lot of people find benefit for long COVID and vaccine injury and MCAS with that. You might look into others. There's others that are famous for being used, but that's probably where I would start. I mean, in the East, they say it's a cure for everything except for death. So um, it has tremendous anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral, and antihistamine effects. And it's a very it's one of those herbs. It's very balanced, that like can be really taken by anyone, similar to things like triphala in the Indian in Ayurvedic medicine. And so it's not one of these things where it's like um, you have to like be careful with it, but try it yourself and see. We have, it's included in my go-to stack, immunity herbals. So we combined it with curcumin and dandelion, which might also be good. But you can also buy it separately, and the potency may be higher, and there may be more of the compounds that come in the natural things. So black seed oil, usually the way you find it is an oil. We created a powdered version for that supplement, and you can get like, what is it? Blessed Seed, I think .com is. That's in the UK, I think, and they have a concentrated, high quality black seed oil supplement. I think it's called blessedseed.com, but I'm not sure. If it loads, I'll confirm that. I'm trying to find it right now. Um, And there are other ones. Do you know of any of the other ones off the top of your head? I'm blanking out on the other ones.
Um, I'm not sure about, I mean, the one thing I wanted to comment on this was, it's good to look at the underlying causes of histamine intolerance. And some of them are things like heavy metal toxicity, medications that inhibit the DAO enzyme that can sometimes cause histamine intolerance, leaky gut, methylation dysfunction. I think those are the main four points I can think of that leave you more predisposed for histamine intolerance. So it's good to kind of treat it from that aspect of, what's an alternative remedy, but also the underlying thing that could be triggering it in the first place.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks for saying that. I mean, I think the most important thing is to try to find underlying things. It's theblessedseed.com, not blessedseed.com. So THEBLESSEDSEED.com. They have black seed oil. And so, yeah, definitely, I think you should look at underlying factors. I think glyphosate toxicity, pesticides are a big one that trigger leaky gut in the first place. So you might consider testing for glyphosate levels, or just assuming that you might have it, since most of us probably are exposed to it and probably have some of it in our bodies, if not a lot of it. And so you can look up Stephanie Seneff's work. She's published a book called Toxic, and goes into that a little bit. And also one of the chapters talks about what you can do about it. So obviously eating organic is one thing, decreasing the amount coming into your body. And the other thing would be trying to take out what is already there. And there's different things you can take, but sauerkraut juice seems to help a lot. It seems to maybe stimulate bacteria that can help destroy the glyphosate and get rid of it slowly. Um, One way or the other, it seems to help. So they've tested it out in cattle, I think, and shown that their glyphosate levels dropped. And they also gave fulvic acid and humic acid, and I think activated charcoal. So you know
mm,
those things will suck out some nutrients too. They'll combine with more than just
mm,
glyphosate. So you got to make sure you're on a nutrient dense diet and replacing the things that you need.
yeah.
And so just my basic understanding of human health is that the body heals itself as long as you remove the harmful things and you give your body the nutrition that it needs. That's essentially what human health is. But you have to expand your understanding of what harmful things are and what nutrients are, right? So, harmful things include thoughts and feelings, right? Negative thoughts and limiting beliefs and negative emotions and negative relationships and electromagnetic fields, and then all the thing and pesticides and chemicals, and then all the other things that you already know of. So some toxins are like food toxins, like sugar and vegetable seed oils and refined carbohydrates. So things that are like ultra refined products, and then just unnatural products like vegetable seed oils, and then toxins like the spike protein, obviously. So you have to get rid of all of those, right? And people oftentimes focus on like some of them, and they think the others aren't important, right? Oftentimes, like the thoughts and the feelings and the relationships are not considered important, and yet they're probably far more important than the physical things that you're focusing on, right? So this is a big, I don't know, focus of mine lately, is trying to convince people how important the things that they don't think are important actually are. And it reminds me of, I think, what Albert Einstein said, and I don't know if this was misattributed or not, but like, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? It's like the definition of insanity. So just if you've been doing the same thing over and over again and focusing on the same things over and over again, maybe try focusing on something different, right? Maybe try expanding your awareness to other things that are toxic to you. And then nutrition, things like again, people don't think are that important, but like sleep is probably one of the most important, and then sun is one of the most important nutrients that you can imagine. And it's way more than vitamin D. It's like directly like feeds your mitochondria with the infrared wavelengths that you don't even have to take off your clothes to get them. They go through your clothing. They go through everything. They pass through your body, into your body, and stimulate your mitochondria. Grounding, another one that no one thinks of, and that seems kind of like woo woo and like fake or whatever, but it's like absolutely not, right? So like studies have shown that you touch the ground and your electric potential in your body and on your body on the surface and inside your blood drops from 0 millivolts to 200 millivolts or negative 200 millivolts. So there is electricity flowing into your body. There are electrons flowing into your body, which is what electricity is, electrons flowing into your body from the earth when you touch it with your bare feet. And this is just proven. This is just like actual science that's been proven. There's no doubt about it. And then there's some things like extrapolations that people make from that like electrons can neutralize free radicals. So if you have extra electrons in your body, they'll just flow down concentration gradients to places where there are not enough electrons. And a free radical is missing an electron. A free radical causes inflammation. And the way it does that is by having anyway, I don't want to get into the physics of it, but essentially it's missing an electron, and that's what's causing the damage. So you have extra electrons coming from the earth, and it just those electrons go and fill up the free radical, make it happy, right? So it's not upset anymore. It's got all of the electrons it needs, and it's happy, and it's not stealing them from other places and causing havoc. And so that's the definition of an antioxidant, is something that contributes an electron to a free radical. And yet chemical antioxidants are blocked from going to certain areas of chronic inflammation. They're blocked, but there's a barrier to them entering. But there's no barrier to entry for free electrons. So grounding is a big one, a nutrient, and then obviously the food that you eat, and then positive thoughts, positive emotions are nutrients that we need. And then all the chemical, the main maybe chemical nutrients that are missing from people's bodies, I think you should just assume that you don't have unless you've tested and checked, would be vitamin D3, vitamin K2. And then if you're supplementing those, you have to supplement the other fat-soluble vitamins. So you also need to supplement vitamin A and vitamin E. So alpha tocopherol, or the mixed tocopherols, or just the tocopherol version of vitamin E, and the retinol version of vitamin A, which is the active form that some people can't make from the plant form, which is beta carotene. So a lot of supplements will give you beta carotene and call it vitamin A, and some people can't turn that into retinol, which is what we need to turn it into to make it active. Magnesium, most people need that. Omega-3s, most people need those. So yeah, those are all important.
I like this question about vitamins. I assume that she's talking about nervous system dysregulation, since that was what we started with, but are there any vitamins good to balance this issue, especially women menopause stage? I think the answer to these kind of questions is just, like I showed in the last slide, there are a lot of different things that affect nervous system dysregulation, and the nutrients you need are the ones you just spoke about, but also whatever you're deficient in is what you need, basically. It sounds very simplistic, but it's sort of you need what you don't have, and that's why your body is not optimized in that way. So doing the lab testing that we do is one way, or just supplementing with the things we know that people usually have deficiencies on. Everyone has a deficiency in magnesium, for example. But in the thing about the menopause that someone asked, so Lara Bryden, I really love her work. She has a book called Every Woman's Guide to Healthy Hormones After 40. And I really recommend that book because all of her books are very specific when it comes to nutrients that you can do to support very specific issues. So you could check that out.
Yeah, the other thing, just in terms of things that might help with somebody who has MCAS in the short term, the DAO enzymes, you can get supplements for those. And they help to break down histamine. And so, and in terms of vitamins that might balance nervous system issues, yeah. So the common ones, if you go to your PCP, they'll be okay, let's check your B12. And sometimes that is an issue, but it's less often than you might imagine. And, it's just tested. And sometimes it's not the cause, but sometimes it really is. So, I saw somebody recently who had a B12 of 100, and it should really probably be, above 500, if not even higher, for most people to be optimal. And he felt immediately 90% better once he started taking B12 shots. He was having trouble absorbing B12 orally also. But yeah, magnesium and omega-3s and all the ones that we mentioned, just the common ones. There are some really simple tests. You can get a homocysteine level. It's usually pretty cheap. And if it's above 7, you can kind of assume that you're not methylating properly, and then you can get an activated B complex. That means methylated versions of the B vitamins. So they will say like methylcobalamin, for example. So cobalamin is B12, and this activated form is methylcobalamin. So if you're not somebody who methylates well for whatever reason, then that could help you. And just taking things like liver, I think, would be a great place to start. Yeah, so yeah, the other thing that just, I just wanted to mention was that most people, in the West at least that I see, are overweight, or they have too much visceral fat, and that is extremely inflammatory. And you could probably fix most of your problems just by losing that. So getting really lean, okay? Like not just like, okay, I'm not overweight, but like actually lean, like you have a flat belly. And then even inside the flat belly, there's no fat packed around your organs, and you have good quality muscles. So people with visceral fat, which is like fat inside that you can't see on the outside, it's not the fat that like people worry about when they go to the beach. It's the fat that is invisible inside you, and it's inside your muscles, it's inside your organs, it might be inside your liver, it's inside other organs too. That fat, you have to get rid of it if you want to optimize your metabolism and your health. So I think that's important. And people will oftentimes be like, you know what, I'm losing weight, and I don't have enough weight, and I feel bad about it, and I need to eat more and stuff. And yet they're not actually lean, So I think we have, as a society, especially in the Western countries and industrialized countries, normalized being overweight, right? Like we feel abnormal if we're actually lean, and some people who are naturally, kind of skinny, they feel like, I don't, I need some weight, otherwise I'm going to look too skinny, And I think you just need to accept the way your body is, and lose that weight, because it's really detracting from your health. Are you looking for another question?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know if you were looking. Yeah, so someone asked about fasting. Will fasting help in nervous system dysregulation?
Sometimes fasting is like anything. You really need to consider everything is like an n of 1 experiment. N equals 1. So that means that like you are the one person in the study, right? If the study has 100 people, it's n equals 100. And an n equals 1 experiment, you're experimenting on yourself or one other person, for example, or somebody else. But basically, you need to look at these things as like trying to figure out what's optimal for you. And just learning that fasting helps thousands of people in studies of thousands of people doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And especially premenopausal women, and you can talk more about this, Michelle. I would say get into it more gradually, and probably avoid while you're menstruating. And but in general, yeah, I think most people benefit from fasting, and it can help correct a lot of things, including nervous system dysregulation. What do you think?
Yeah,
You've
yeah, I
spoke.
think
You have a talk that you gave on fasting in women specifically, right?
yeah, yeah, I think that maybe there are some contraindications in the case of women in the childbearing years, because like when you lose fat too quickly, even if you are overweight, just the thing of losing fat makes your body think you're in an environment of scarcity, and then it can down regulate fertility and these kind of hormones. But I think the other instance I was thinking of is, some people who have nervous system dysregulation, it's because it's also intertwined with this HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal fatigue. And sometimes fasting can make that worse, because fasting requires a cortisol response in order to work and kick in. It's essentially a stress state on the body, and as we know, stress is good and it can also be bad. So exercise is good, but if you have long COVID, exercise is not good. So there are these double-edged swords, and it's good to know which thing to apply to which kind of circumstance. And there are some contraindications for fasting in that case.
Yeah, so I think that if you approach things in a balanced way, they'll work the way they're supposed to work. And so if you're like isolating fasting is like something that I'm going to do all by itself without like sleeping properly and without managing stress and without like addressing all these other lifestyle issues that are way off, then certainly it could be, harmful, or it could be like contraindicated. But if you address all the things that you should be addressing, and then kind of like ease into things instead of like rushing into them suddenly, and just like ask yourself, does this feel good or does it feel bad? Is it working for me? And if it's not working for you, then cut back on it or do it more gradually, and at the same time add the other things that you need in your life, so that fasting doesn't
Mm,
tip the scale on the stress. You have to deal with all of the stress that you're already going through in your
mm,
life, so that fasting's not that bad. So stressors that you have control over, like fasting, are less, they affect you less negatively than stressors you have no control over. So that's
mhm.
a positive. But with everything, just try it and see if it works. And especially, it's best to just ease into things. I think that's the main thing. Like,
Yeah.
don't like suddenly change like 360 degrees, and change things gradually so that your body has a chance to catch up and
Mhm.
get used to it. And except for like truly harmful things, I think you can just get rid of, um, instead of easing yourself out of them. But in general, like when you're adding things like changing stuff in lifestyle or whatever, then gradual is better. But also just being balanced about it.
Mm.
So
Yeah, doing a 12-hour overnight fast is a good way to start,
mhm.
um, and then go up from there. Actually, one question someone in the group had, which was quite interesting, was about, maybe you might have some thoughts on this, was people who want to fast, but they have to take prescription medications with their daily breakfast, and whether or not they can take it on an empty stomach. Or, I mean, my suggestion was to have something like a boiled egg or something with it, so it's not, you're kind of breaking the fast but not totally, because you're having something high fat and high protein. But if you have anything else to say on that, because maybe that's something a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the medication, right? So, does the medication have to be taken with food? Does it, is it a
Yeah,
medication?
it has to be with food, and it was also twice a day, like morning and evening. I can't remember specifically what it is now, but it was more, so you can't just take it at another time because it required this spacing.
Yeah, yeah, and so I would, in general, people who are on medications, I think you can usually wean off the medications. So I can't answer like specifically because I don't know what medication we're talking about, but um, almost all medications I think you can wean off of without causing yourself undue harm, and address them from a lifestyle perspective. But not everyone is willing to do that, so it's kind of like up to you specifically whether you want to work with somebody to wean off of medications. But if you have to take it with food, you have to take it with food, and then it's just a matter of like how much food, right? Like, is a teaspoon of oil enough, or do you need to like actually eat a whole meal? And I don't think any doctor that you go to, including your PCP or anyone else, is going to like have the exact answer for you on that question. And it might just be like, okay, what's the effect of this medication that I can measure? And then like, let me see, maybe I can actually take it without food. Maybe I don't really need to take it with food. Maybe I absorb enough without food that it's not really that necessary, even though it's supposed to be with food. And so, yeah, I mean, I would just, again, make myself an N of one experiment if this was me, and like try different things and see, like, maybe I can just take a teaspoon of oil, or maybe I could just take it without food. Maybe I'll start off with like eating less and then eat even less, and like see, okay, what's the effect on my blood pressure or heart rate, or blood sugar, or whatever it is that medicine is doing for you, right? If it's actually doing something that's measurable. So yeah, I mean, these kind of things can be kind of like adjusted and hacked out, depending on the specifics.
So someone asked, I feel these symptoms upon learning I'm diabetic. Is there a connection with sugar spike? I, I guess they're speaking of nervous system dysregulation symptoms.
Yeah. So from the structure of the question, like, I'm not sure if like learning you're diabetic, you started feeling these symptoms after you learned that, and in which case it seems like there's like an element of your mind involved where you think that you're less healthy than you used to think you were, and now, or maybe somebody told you that you might have this or that symptom with diabetes, and then suddenly you start having it. So there might be a nocebo effect involved. I don't know if that's what you meant, but it's certainly the case for some people. You go to a doctor and they don't know how to communicate properly, and they'll like actually create illness for you or create symptoms, because like giving you these negative suggestions to your subconscious, telling you that this will probably happen, and this or that or blah blah blah. And so it's important to understand that the way physicians communicate, especially, can affect your health positively or negatively. If you want to learn more about that, read Steve Bierman's book, Healing Beyond Pills and Potions. So is there a connection to sugar? Yeah. So sugar, if it's too high for too long and chronically is very inflammatory, it's going to stick itself onto proteins where it doesn't belong. It's going to glycate them, or cause them to be attached to sugars. And so it's a very inflammatory condition for your vascular system and your nervous system and your whole body. Your brain, everything is damaged by high sugar. So it can certainly cause autonomic, issues and problems. But if it was like a sudden change after somebody telling you, then that's probably, going to happen to you. Then it might have been a nocebo effect that you can reverse pretty easily without even lowering your blood sugar. But I think in general, what anyone who has a sugar issue, or even somebody who doesn't think they have a sugar problem, get a continuous glucose monitor and see what causes your blood sugar to spike. You're going to see stress cause it to spike. Certain foods that may not even be high in sugar could cause it to spike because you're just reacting in a stressful way to them. And it can be foods that you don't realize are causing that stress. And so once you realize that, you can maybe remove those foods from your diet, even though they're technically, healthy foods for most people. And there's obviously supplements and things, but I when I treat people who really accept like the kind of like drastic lifestyle measures, you can reverse diabetes in days sometimes. Okay, like diabetes, like insulin taking diabetics. I just saw this with my own eyes with one of my patients. She started fasting and eating differently, and literally within a couple of days she doesn't need insulin anymore. And so it's like she has normal blood sugars. And I mean, it's just like that kind of stuff, when you see it over and over again, it's like you're just like, how can I convince other people to do this? Because like it doesn't take that long to fix when you just like really commit. And the bigger problem with diabetics is like low blood sugar. When you really drastically change your diet, I would say like err on the side of like having high blood sugar, because like if you drastically change your diet, you won't need the insulin or the metformin or the glyburide or whatever it is you're taking. Like it will just become completely unnecessary really, really fast. And your doctor will not expect how fast the problem will reverse. And then you'll go into like hypoglycemic shock and you'll end up in the ER. So, if somebody really is making a drastic change, I usually like tell them to just like, don't take your sugar until it goes up. And then, if it's up, then take the thing and maybe take half the dose, right? Or even less. So you have to be really careful in reverse. You have to avoid dropping the sugar too low, because it can really like just, the issue can just like dissolve in front of your eyes within days, when you stop doing the things that's causing it to go up. Red light therapy has been helping quite a bit. Somebody says, do you have any thoughts on this? Yeah. So red light therapy is kind of like grounding. It's like everyone in the world for hundreds of thousands of years, or perhaps longer, but as far as we know, modern humans have been on this planet for 200 or 300,000 years, and maybe longer. But that's how far back we've seen them. And for 99.9% of that time, every single person on Earth got red light therapy every single day by walking outside their cave or stepping outside their tent, or whatever, and just walking around in the sunlight. So our bodies, they feel like the message you're sending your body in the modern world is that you have moved underground, okay? And you're living in subterranean realm. so even though it looks like there's a lot of light in your house, inside your body doesn't is not sensing the light, right? So your eyes see visible light that's coming through your windows, but it's blocking out UVB, right? It's letting in UVA, which is like aging your skin. It's blocking the UVB that would create vitamin D, and it's blocking all the infrared, which would light up your mitochondria with energy. So your mitochondria feel as though you're in like a cave in complete blackness and in complete darkness, and this is not natural, right? So it's like you don't even have to like understand why it would be beneficial. If you understand that like human beings, that's their natural environment, it must be bad for you to not have that, right? It must be bad for you not to have those extra electrons coming from the earth. It must be bad for you not to have access to that infrared, shining on you every
Mm.
single day, right, of your life. So you got to go outside. There's like no two ways about it. And I would say spend as much time outside as you possibly can, right? The minimums
Mm.
would be like, probably an hour for most people outside, right? Like maybe 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes midday, 20 minutes late afternoon. So you're going to get infrared all those times, but midday is when you're going to get the vitamin D. And some people, when you start living outside most of the time, you'll see that that itself could be the one thing that makes you feel so much better, right? Like a lot of long haulers, they're lying in their bed all day long, every day, not doing anything. Just, buy an outdoor bed or like a easy chair or lounger or something and just do that outside, right? And that one change could make you feel like 100% better.
Mm.
And it's not just the sun, right? About being outside. It's also there's this aromatherapy, essentially natural aromatherapy, like the trees and the leaves and the grass and everything release these scent compounds into the air that also have anti-inflammatory effects that also calm down your nervous system and have very healing effects on you. And it's also just the fresh air, and it's also the EMFs. So you have these natural electromagnetic fields outdoors that are disrupted indoors. And that's just what we know, right? Like that's just what we can explain
Mhm.
of why people feel better when they're outside. I mean, I think that one of the reasons people get sick when they're traveling, on airplanes is that they are completely disconnected from the natural world for like really long periods of time. So like, first of all, you go to the airport, you're not grounded anymore, you're not getting natural light anymore, and you're breathing recycled air. And then you go into an airplane, it's the same thing. And then also the EMFs are like really bizarre. You're high up and you've got like, so anyway, it's like, again, no sunlight, no fresh air, no grounding. And then you go from the plane to another airport to another plane. And like this whole time, like you never step outside, right? You never
Mhm.
get out into like nature. And it's just, it completely, your nervous system is way out of whack in that environment. And so you have to take extra precautions when you're traveling. All right. So
Mm.
we
And that's why the pilots have, you know, the studies done on pilots, especially who do long haul flights, they have a lot of predisposure to different conditions
yeah.
just from flying basically their whole career because of all these things.
Yeah. Were there any other questions that we missed? This is me every day, almost leaky gut.
Uh,
How could the Phoenix Protocol help? Yeah, so the Phoenix Protocol is the group coaching program that Michelle leads, and I'm really like, passionate about this idea of getting people into groups. So what we're trying to do is to develop like a free version of the Phoenix Protocol where if you bring a buddy or a group of people and you're going to meet every week, and you're going to like go through the protocol, you can get access for free. Um, and the reason we're doing that is because I think that the group setting is probably the most effective way to change your lifestyle when you're in an environment where lifestyle change is hard, right? So if you were living in the Amazon, it wouldn't be hard. It would just be like, this is what I got to do. You would be forced to live a healthy life. If you were in that community Michelle was talking about, you're just kind of like, it's just like easy to live a healthy life because that's just like the default. There's no other way to live. You just have to, right? And so if you can't do that, then the next best thing is to be in a group of people who are trying to live as naturally as possible and in the best possible way in the modern world, with the limitations that we have, and like hack out a system that makes it easy. And like, it takes some effort. You have to like force yourself to do certain things because it's not like naturally imposed upon you by your environment. And so there's some research that shows that, triggering people to change what they do is extremely hard in sociological research. The thing that makes it easy is a group setting. So, you can actually get people to do things different, like the first time they hear it sometimes in a group setting. And there's a number of different psychological reasons for this. There's like a group, cohesiveness that develops, there's group support that develops, and you feel like kind of, like responsible to like a responsibility to your group, the other people in your group, right? Like it's kind of like a tribal kind of mindset where like, okay, we're all trying to help each other go in a certain direction and do certain things. And, that patient that I presented at the conference, he said that, he felt like he wanted to like come to the group, like the live group session every week, and like tell them what he had done from that week's like reading. He kind of like felt like some small obligation to like contribute something, like I'm part of it, I'm with you guys, I'm doing the thing, right? I haven't. So you just feel like a bit of responsibility, and it makes it easy, right? Like it's not like something you have to try as hard to do. And so it's just about like giving yourself the natural like help, right? Like the things that make it easy for a human being to do the things that they know they should do. Those are, they could be built into a natural environment, but like a tribe, kind of like having a tribe is part of that natural environment, right? So you can take that, and so you can just choose like apply leverage in the place where it's going to be most effective and give you the most for the least effort, right? And so I think that the most for the least effort is showing up to like a group meeting or something and being a part of a group of people who are all trying to accomplish the same thing. It makes it far easier to accomplish when you're in a group of people who are trying to help each other do it. So the Phoenix program, in general, is the Phoenix protocol is the name for this kind of like program of lifestyle change, and there's you can get access to it, monthly on your own, paid access to the course, or you can get it for free if you're part of a group that's just going to like meet and help each other, or you can join it in like a group coaching program with Michelle leading you. And I think that's a great option also. I mean, it's really great to have a group leader who has embodied a lot of the, healthy lifestyle things, and, fixed her own health, and she's been there, done that, and so that's beneficial to have. And she is a trained nutritionist, and works as a health coach, so it's beneficial to have a professional along the way, helping out. And then you also have access to things like a medical team, my medical team, and we give you some help on like personalizing supplements and stuff like that. And you can get lab testing done if you want, and all kinds of extras that you can add on. Or you can do a similar program, but do it one-on-one with Michelle. And that's good for people who have very specific kind of like things that might benefit. And you can discuss those with Michelle, in a free call. So any other thoughts on the group coaching program? How can the Phoenix protocol help? Oh, one other thing. I'm going to say one other thing before I let you speak.
Okay.
So, the other
Okay.
thing I want to say that I learned recently, when I was, again, preparing for the FLCCC conference, was that the effect of education, right? Like, how does education about something actually help you? So, we usually think that like, okay, I'm going to learn about this thing, and then I'm going to have to do it, right? And then it's going to benefit me. And so that's one of the benefits of education, is you learn something you didn't know, and something about something you weren't doing, and then you're like more inclined to do it. So that is definitely one of the benefits. The other benefit is you learn about things that you may actually already be doing, but you didn't realize how beneficial they are. So all of us sleep, right? But do you really know all the details about why sleep is so beneficial? And so some research shows really strongly that when you're actually already doing something and then somebody educates you on like how beneficial that actually is, and you didn't know that like all the benefits of that thing, there's a placebo effect that's like activated where you like actually get even more benefits out of that thing than you were getting otherwise. So the study that really blew me away on this was two groups of hotel room cleaners, right? They were all women, and they all went into the hotel rooms every day, and they like changed them out, right? Like changed the sheets and cleaned them and everything, top to bottom. And they did this all day, every day. That was their job. And so half of them, they told them about the benefits of exercise in general, right? That was the control group. And then the intervention group, they told them about the benefits of exercise, but they also pointed out specifically how many calories they burned with all the stuff they were already doing every day. And they basically told them as well that the amount of activity you're doing in your job qualifies as like it's equal to or greater than what the Surgeon General recommends Americans get for exercise every day, right? Like you're meeting and exceeding the recommendations for daily exercise, right? So they told them that, and then they followed up after a month, and these women didn't change anything about their diet or their life or their work or their gym going habits or anything, right? Yet after a month, the people who had been told that what they were doing qualified as exercise and was beneficial and whatever, they lost 2 pounds without changing anything. So just like effortlessly, without doing anything differently. They had just received like 30 minutes of education. Okay, 30 minutes of education meant losing half a pound a week over the course of a month, and their waist size got smaller and their blood pressure went down. Right, on average 10 points. I mean, pretty serious. Like it's double the effect of like cutting your salt. Okay, salt maybe triple. So salt, like drastically slashing your salt intake will drop your blood pressure by like 2 to 4 points. You're right, on average. So what that tells me is that like don't worry about your salt and worry about your education. And the other one that was really shocking to me, there were two studies showing that people who and this is kind of on a different topic, but elderly people whose perceived health, who perceive their health to be good, they had 6 times lower risk of dying than people who perceive their health to be bad, regardless of their actual health. So like it didn't matter whether, and this doctors see this all the time. Okay, like new patient comes in, you're like, do you have any health problems? No. Do you take any medications? And they rattle off like 15 medications. Okay, I see this over and over again. And when they rattle off the medications, like in the doctor's mind, it's like, okay, diabetes, high cholesterol, thyroid, dysfunction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on and on and on. And yet the person perceives their health to be pretty good. And so this is actually a good thing. This I didn't think it was, but it actually is. And unfortunately, what happens when you go to most doctors is they educate you in the wrong way, that you're actually less healthy than you think you are, right? Which actually makes you more likely to die, okay, and be sick. So if it can affect your likelihood of dying, I guarantee you it can affect anything less than that, which would be chronic illness, symptoms, everything else. So just be careful about who you go to and what they say to you. So anyway, what say,
Mhm.
Michelle?
I was going to say, I feel like my grandma is a good example of this because she's 85, I think now, and she basically just stopped working last year. And she was driving into downtown to work as an accountant until just, a year or two ago. And I think she used to always be told that she had high cholesterol and she might have to start statins, and they said stop having cream and all of these kind of things. And she's always been sort of alternative, and she really likes homeopathy and yoga and organic food and all of these kind of things. So her solution to that was just stopping going to the doctor for testing. So she's like, okay, I think I just won't go there anymore. I'm just going to continue my life. And this was in her 40s. She had this, and she's now in her mid 80s, and she's the healthiest grandma that I know, um, because she just didn't want to be fed with this fear mongering idea that she was had to now take pharmaceutical drugs and wasn't allowed to eat cream anymore. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people, that I meet and that I see online and meet in person, a lot of them, they have like fantastic health and they never go to the doctor, and they actually like make a point of not going to these doctors. And I think They have, it's just like, it's literally dangerous to go to most physicians. Okay. And it's not just what they say, but also what they give you and what they do and the testing that they
Mm,
do. You over test. So like there was a study on, people who get mammograms, right? And they compare like women who got mammograms for, 10 years every year or whatever, that's recommended for screening versus no mammograms for 10 years. And the group that gets mammograms, as often as they're recommended for screening purposes, you end up finding a lot of cancers, right? Far more cancers than show up in the group that doesn't get the screening. And so what this means is that the group that doesn't get screening, they're matched groups, like they're similar, right? So the group that doesn't get screening, cancers are showing up in their breasts and then they're just regressing on their own. They're just disappearing on their own. They're popping
mm,
up and then they're disappearing. And then at the end of 10 years, you don't find them. But if you look for them, you will find them, and then you will get stuck into like the whole medical industrial complex, and you might lose your breast, you might lose your lymph nodes, you might spend the rest of your life with like a swollen arm. And so the outcomes are like far worse for the group that gets the screening, okay? Because they get medicalized,
mm,
they get sucked into the system and turned into patients, and they feel, unhealthy, and they think that they're unhealthy, and they think that they're about to die, and they're super stressed out, and it can turn into like a hamster wheel of where you just get on, you never get off, right? And you just keep getting worse and worse. And
mm,
um, really, like when I was, before I got into long haul and vaccine injury, I was working in Jordan in like the countryside, just like working with people and trying. This was just what I was doing in my free time between hospitalist jobs in the US. I would fly back there and I would like just talk to people about, and I would go through their medications with them. I would like, and somebody had a translator because I didn't speak Arabic, and they would bring me their medications, and they would say, okay, I started this medication first for this problem, and then I started this one second and third and fourth, and we would put them in order of like the time order, like when they started in time, so chronological order, and like literally every time. Okay, I don't know if this was like true every time, but like every single time you could find a side effect from the earlier medication that explained why the next medication in chronological order was started. And I mean, it's not, maybe not every single one of those cases, like literally all this, all the knock-on medication, like the future medications may not have been due to side effects, but like when people saw that, they like, it really opened their eyes and they were like, oh my God, right? Like maybe like 9 out of 10 of these are just for side effects of the earlier ones,
mm,
like the first one causes a side effect and I take like the second one for the side effect of the first one, and then one or two cause another side effect, and then I take the third for one of those side effects, and like on and on and on, all the way down the list. I mean, it's like statins. 2% of the time they cause
mm,
diabetes. Okay, and so when I started seeing this and seeing this in this way, and like understanding that like all of these medications, they're just like trying to force the body not to do something that it's being told to do. It's like doing for a reason. It's not like something that like struck you out of nowhere. Okay, it's not like a lightning bolt that came from the heavens and like gave you this high blood pressure. It's what you're doing in your life that's giving you high blood pressure.
mm,
It's what you're doing in your life that's giving you the cancer in your breast. It's what you're doing, or what you're exposing yourself to, the thoughts, feelings, emotions, toxins, all that stuff are being expressed in this way. And sometimes the illness, like rashes, or for example, might actually be your body trying to get rid of that thing, right? Trying to get rid of the toxin somehow. Or things like diarrhea, right? Like these gastrointestinal disorders where people have a lot of diarrhea. Maybe your body's just trying to get rid of the thing, right? And you're like,
mm,
oh, I need to stop the diarrhea, right? Maybe you don't need to stop it. Maybe you need to stop, taking in the toxins that your body's trying to get rid of with the diarrhea. Um, so anyway, those are some of my thoughts there. Are we done, or I keep going
yeah.
literally all day long?
Yeah, there's so many bounce off topics.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. One thing I will say is what I've noticed is that, often the hardest people to work with are nurses or previous people who've worked in terms of weaning off medications and not being really convinced of this, what you're saying, that another effect is the side effect of something else. And I can really understand why that is, because even I feel on the days that I do really intense work on building the program or fixing, certain chapters, I find myself being like, oh, maybe I have long COVID because I had COVID 3 times in the space of a year, I think, or so. And then I'm like, and then I somehow by the end of the day, I'm like convinced because I'm like, oh, I once heard a sound in my ear when I was in the bathroom and it was really silent. Maybe I have tinnitus, you know? And it's crazy that I start to have this anxiety about it. And it's only on those days when I'm really reading about the topic and the symptoms. So it's interesting how that happens. And you know, if you're really invested in this industry and you're a nurse and you're working with these medications, I can see the resistance to letting this go, or this idea that those things aren't needed and it's possible to wean off.
Yeah.
And I can understand why if that's been your career for a long time.
Yeah, this is important because it's like miseducation, right? Like you are miseducating yourself. And this is, I think, a very important thing to point out and mention is that a lot of people who are sick are like, they keep doing all this research on their illness and like
Yeah.
convincing themselves more and more of this like paradigm or this story of why their illness exists. And okay, maybe it's because of this or that like microscopic thing going on in my mitochondria or in my DNA or whatever, right? Maybe the spike protein is doing
Hmm.
this thing to me, and maybe I have inflammation in my, maybe my brain's swollen, maybe I hear all of these things, right? And um, that's fine, but like you are in part like contributing to this thing, right? Like you are feeding it. Is what I'm trying to
Hmm.
explain to people. You have to like stop scaring yourself and stop like this is difficult, I think, for people in the West to like not understand, right? Like you feel like you need to understand in somehow, right? And I guess this is what human beings have done always, and they've explained it to themselves in different ways, right? Like in terms of humors or in terms of gods and demons or whatever, right? Like there's all these different like stories about why you're sick, and like even the modern ones, like they're not actually true. Okay, like they are true to an extent, right? There's like some truth to them, but they're incomplete, right? Like no matter how much we learn, it's always going to be an incomplete version of reality. Or like the understanding that we have is at best like an extremely incomplete like reflection
Hmm.
of what's actually happening in reality.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's because like it must be incomplete because it's a model. It is not actually reality, right? Reality is here. It's like in you. It is you, right? It is your experience. That is the reality. And the model that's in your brain of that reality is by definition incomplete. It can't be complete. Okay. And so if you understand that it's extremely incomplete, right? Like when you figure out just how incomplete it actually is, like how little we actually know about what's going on inside you, maybe you can like take a step out of that like minutia, right? Like trying to like study it under a microscope and step back, like
Hmm.
get into like the, I don't know, the state of mind of like people in the past where they kind of like step into their like experience, right? And they
Hmm.
start to understand like what is the meaning for me, right? Like how do I understand this in a visceral level, right? Like what does it mean to me emotionally, intellectually? What does it mean to me like in terms of my past and in terms of what's happened to me? Like what meaning is my mind assigning to it, right? Like how do I actually understand it in my body, and especially emotionally, which we oftentimes don't think of. And if you approach it from that way, like you can actually heal really anything. Okay, and if you approach it from this other direction of like I have to like fix my DNA, you may not be able to quote unquote fix your DNA, but I guarantee you can fix whatever you're experiencing. Like your symptoms can go away and you can feel like, optimally healthy, and you can live to 120, without any problems, right? That is possible. Whether or not you can like tweak your DNA or like tweak the spike protein or like tweak the microclots or like do something else, don't worry about that, right? Like worry about the outcome, okay? And don't get lost in the woods, right? Like trying
Hmm.
to like go down all these little paths and like figure out how do I like tweak this or that to like hack myself back to being healthy.
Hmm.
Just like look at it from like a distance and look at the whole picture and start to like just be in your body, be in the moment. This is like, I'm paraphrasing Wim Hof. I love this guy. He's got like the best voice.
Yeah, he's
Just
amazing.
listen to his YouTube video. It's a 10 or 11-minute video, guided breathing meditation. It's got like 60 million views. And he's like, be in this moment. You know?
His voice is quite.
Yeah. Yeah, just like feel. Yeah, it's fantastic. And you do that every day, maybe a couple of times a day, and you'll step back into your body and into your own experience. And
Mm,
this is like, there's a deeper truth to your own experience than there is to like the models in your,
yeah.
right? And this is what people in like the ancient Eastern cultures, like that's what they try to transmit to you. It's like, don't try to like figure out what chi is. Just like feel it. Just feel what it feels like to you, right? Like it feels like there's something moving around in your body. It feels like there's something in your hands. It feels like
Mhm.
it feels as though you're being pushed around by this grandmaster who's like using his chi on you. And just like try to like, interpret it from your own experience, right? Like what does it feel
Mm,
like? And not like be so concerned about what it actually is, because that's always going to be wrong, right? Whereas your experience is always correct. Like it's correct in
yeah.
a different way, but it is 100% true, right? Versus the model in your brain is always less than 100% true. And it's usually way less than 100%. It's like, Lord Kelvin, like 120 years ago or whatever, it was like, we've figured out everything there is to figure out in physics. And it's like, this is like pre-Einstein. It's like, and
Yeah.
now every single generation thinks that we've figured it all out. There's just like a few little details we need to fix up. There are always going to be new paradigm shifts in the future that are as big as the paradigm shift of general relativity, right? And special relativity
Mhm.
Einstein gave us. And then after that, right? Like, the paradigm shifts that came afterwards, quantum mechanics and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
there are future paradigm shifts that are as big or bigger, and they're going to continue and continue and continue, because there's like no end to the complexity of reality and
Mhm.
nature and creation. Um,
Yeah, and I think that the only way to really speak about infinite complexity is through very seemingly simplistic and abstract concepts. So when these concepts and words and ideas seem oversimplified, it's because it's the opposite. It's because that's the only way to talk about infinite complexity.
yeah.
And if you start talking about specific minutia, then you're immediately moving away from the reality, which is infinite complexity. And it's really, I think, important to not assign a level of sophistication to this minutia, because it's actually the opposite of that.
That's a great way of
So,
putting it. Yeah, that I think you said it really well. And this is, I think, the downfall of the Western medical approach, is that it's digging into like the minute little details, and
mm,
not looking at the whole system together and stepping back. And
and then saying that's really sophisticated and like, wow, this is so, advanced. And it's like, okay, well, in one dimension, but actually moving away from the whole, which is the infinite complexity. And unless you're reflecting the reality, which is infinite complexity, then you're moving away from objective truth in some way.
Yeah,
So,
which is really why, these ancient alternative medical systems are far more sophisticated. Okay, even though they seem very simplistic, they are like leaps and bounds more sophisticated than the Western medical approach. I mean, it's like extremely crude. Okay, and this is the success of this Western system has been to convince people that it's incredibly sophisticated and complicated, and that physicians understand so much about your body, and scientists understand so much about reality, when in fact we understand less and less with each passing year, because we're getting more and more like subspecialized and not stepping back and seeing the big picture. So yeah, it's something that I think we should talk about more, and just like we need to explain to people, why. Uh,
mm,
and this is what, changing your lifestyle and like what you do, it taps into things that we can't fully understand and we can't fully explain. And this is one of the points that I made in my FLCCC presentation was that, okay, you can look up all these studies and it says, okay, in one study, some cold at this temperature for this long made cortisol go down. In another study, it made cortisol go up. And you might say that, well, we want cortisol to go up in most long haulers because it's too low and blah, 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 right? But this is like missing the point. Like it's like what's actually happening is probably like when you apply the right environment, right, in the right way, it's just going to normalize things, right? Whether they're too high or too low, it's just going to bring them back in balance. It's not going to have like a specific effect, right? It's going to depend on what you need.
Yeah.
And this is not something that you can get from a drug, right? A drug has an effect. And real,
it's like the adaptogens, like lifestyle adaptogens, basically.
I'm just going to read some of the comments that we might have missed. How can we be tested for autonomic dysfunction? So one of the things you do, there's like one of the things you could do is you can I think you stand for like 10 minutes and like measure your blood pressure and heart rate throughout that time. And
heart rate variability.
There's also the heart rate variability monitor that you can get. Do you need to go?
Soon.
Okay.
I need to go, but how much longer do you?
You can.
Well, we can do.
Need to go, but I'm just gonna read through the rest of these real quick.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also looking.
Some can't afford stellate ganglion block. Yeah, I wouldn't get a stellate ganglion block on myself, even if I could afford it. Honestly, it's for people who want to try that. I don't like the idea of injecting a chemical into my neck, and maybe most of it gets metabolized and taken out, but some of it might stay there, and it might have some negative effects that you don't want. So, when people do body work, this is something that I didn't even know, but like I had learned about, like there was this acupuncturist who was an MD. I don't remember his name, Neil something, Edwards, I think, up in the Pacific Northwest. And so he described using like really big needles and like separating deep tissue planes. And he'll say that like oftentimes these like gases, noxious gases come out of the person's body.
Yeah.
And so he's basically like releasing toxins that have been trapped inside, chemical toxins like pesticides, other things. And it can make him sick. Actually, he has to be careful about it.
Yeah.
He has to really detox or maybe have like systems to like suck out the toxins and gases and stuff when he's working on people. But even just regular body workers who do like deep tissue like work have reported the same thing, where like smells are coming out of their patients while they're working on them. The most remarkable thing that I came across was that some body workers, they like experience like repressed memories from the patient on the table when they're working on them. And sometimes like the person on the table and the body worker experience the same like memory that's like trapped in the body somewhere at the same time. And sometimes the people on the table forget it later. It's just like the body worker's like talking to them about it or something, or they're like, they know that they experienced it and then they like forget about it after like 30 minutes after the session. So really amazing stuff. So where can we access live streams again at a later time? So I think they go to Rumble. So Dr. Syed Haider on Rumble. Okay, yeah, somebody put up the link. And somebody else says, thank you for your vulnerability with the video games.
So yeah, that's an issue a lot of people have. I didn't realize, but when I speak to people on group coaching and one-on-one, themselves, but also they talk about their family members, like people who just play video games all day. So it's definitely.
What I'll say is that like it seems sometimes when you're in the depth of it, like really hard to get out. But again, you just apply the right leverage and you just like pop out of it like overnight. It's really not that hard if you apply the right leverage at the right time in the right place. And that could be exercise, it could be cold exposure, it could be like a group setting, like a 12-step program certainly can apply that leverage to.
Or just changing your environment, like going camping, going to volunteer. I was speaking to a group coaching person about how many volunteer sites there are where you can live for free and eat for free, and you basically volunteer like on a farm, different places like all around the world, or even you can swap your house. This is something that I sometimes do also. You can swap your house for someone else's house in another state or even another country, and just be in a different environment and just notice how that changes everything, basically, rather than just kind of forcing everything's the same, but I'm going to try to quit video games, then that's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you stay out of it long enough, I mean, you just first of all see that it's not that hard, right? Like you can actually change quite easily, and then you can step back into your life, and it can often be easier to stay better. So anyway, let's wrap it up. Thanks for going for 2 hours and 10 minutes.
No, it's good that you joined, because otherwise, yeah, it was nice to bounce these ideas around.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
I'll try to join more often because I really enjoy it myself. And if I do it every week, then maybe we won't have to do it for 2 hours.
Yeah.
But thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe, and that tells the algorithm that it's important and it should be served up to other people. And yeah, you can check out mygotodoc.com, or what is the coaching program website?
The coach at mygotodoc.com.
I think it's coach at coach.mygotodoc.com. Phoenix program, or you can just scan the QR code. Yep, coach.mygotodoc.com. All right. Thank you, everyone. And
thanks, everyone.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.